So I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this event. I think that this is an excellent example of how we can work together across a region to really improve our monitoring systems. And so today what I would like to talk to you about is the work to develop the monitoring framework for the Global Biodiversity Framework. The Global Biodiversity Framework will be the new global framework for biodiversity, which is being adopted at the Convention for Biological Diversity, and it's also being adopted by the other biodiversity-related conventions. So in terms of who I am, I work for the Convention on Biological Diversity. I have just started there. Before that, I was working with UNEP, and I'm leading the work on monitoring, review, and reporting. And this really, as I mentioned, what we're really trying to do here is develop a coherent monitoring system for biodiversity that will provide the world with information that they need on biodiversity. And so I'm excited to tell you about this today because I think that the only way that we're going to be able to do this is if we all work together to better understand biodiversity and other environmental challenges and how this relates to sustainable development more broadly. So today I'll go through how I see the challenge of measuring biodiversity at both the national level, at the national and global level. What are the lessons learned that we have from the SDGs and from the IACHI targets in terms of measuring biodiversity and other global monitoring? And then how do we use these to develop a monitoring framework for global biodiversity? So what I want to start with is just, I thought that this quote was really nice, that there's a tendency in science to measure what is measurable and then to decide that what you cannot measure must be uninteresting. I see this a lot in the environmental field and in biodiversity. We know that biodiversity is important. We know that we care about it, but we don't have a lot of the measures that we need in terms of demonstrating the value of ecosystem services or demonstrating the value of biodiversity. And so we focus our statistical work on what already has been measured. And so I think if we're going to sort of turn the tide and actually be able to protect our natural resources, while at the same time protecting and promoting human development, we're going to have to find new ways to measure biodiversity and to work together on these issues. And so if you look, these are some of the questions that I ask myself. I'm not going to read all of them right now, but the questions that I ask is how can we have something that's ambitious, that gives us a direction for monitoring the future, while at the same time taking advantage of the data that we have now, using different sorts of information, and how do we get different actors engaged in the process? And so these are some of the main questions that we have as we're trying to develop a global framework for measuring biodiversity that also works at the national level. And then how do we build the capacity across countries and across our networks in order to actually have the right data at the right scale at the right time? So in terms of the lessons learned from the SDGs, the SDGs have strong national ownership and strong national buy-in. However, there is a discrepancy between what's available at the global level and at the national level. And at the global level, 68% of the environment-related SDG indicators don't have enough data to assess progress. Additionally, there's very few indicators that are actually related to environmental state and trends or people, or SCP, sustainable consumption and production. And most of the indicators relate to mechanisms and policy. And there's no real way to link how we're doing in terms of the policy with where we want to get in terms of seeing a change in terms of the environmental state and trend. The IACHI focused a lot more on the global monitoring, on working with global data providers, and there's really strong support from a large group of NGOs and partners. However, from this framework, which measures biodiversity or measured biodiversity in the past, there's a lack of national ownership, and the indicators that were selected are not really fit for purpose for national stakeholders. And so as we're moving forward to develop the global biodiversity framework, monitoring framework that we're developing now, we're trying to take into account these lessons learned and develop something that's simple, that can be easily used by countries, that has a delineation between the target level indicators, which have to do with actions, and the goal level indicators, which have to do with the state of the environment and how do these interact with each other. And then we really want to make sure that we engage with national statistical systems and geospatial entities both, so that we can have better monitoring at the national and subnational level, and a link with the national monitoring and the global level monitoring. And finally, for the framework that we're developing now, we're looking to have an agreed set of headline indicators that right now is about 40 indicators that we're looking at, which we would be trying to roll out in all countries. And as the convention itself is a legal instrument, ideally we would be trying to make this mandatory in the reporting, and therefore an obligation that we would actually work with countries to get these indicators reported. And so we would make sure that, we try to promote this national ownership. Of course, for this to happen, then there's going to be a real need to build capacity to encourage coordination among the national statistical system, geospatial entities, and the ministries of environment at the national level. And then we're going to need a way to actually translate this into information that can be used for national reports and for planning processes. So with that, I'll conclude, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste for where we're trying to go in terms of monitoring the global biodiversity framework at the global level, but also how this links with the national level and how this links with regional and national organizations such as those present today. Thank you.